It's a weird feeling. Never been focused.
I'm happy I was your first Vic. Thanks a lot, Vic. I appreciate it. So, what did you think? Fooled? Did I really read his mind? Hello everybody, you are listening to the Magic Skeptic, aka Magic Dara, and you are very welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. A Magician's Thoughts indeed. As you can see, today we are going to discuss something which is very closely related to magic, and yet simultaneously, I believe that it is very closely related to my activities as, you might say, a debunker, or even just a philosopher more generally, because mind reading is something that kind of has one foot firmly steeped in this world of the supernatural. And at the end of the day, when I make videos debunking the idea of, I don't know, heaven, or debunking the idea of karma, or debunking the idea of gods and whatnot, miracles, etc., all of these things are supernatural phenomena, and I guess I view my work here as a philosopher on this channel as being something of a debunker of those kinds of supernatural and metaphysical beliefs. Perhaps debunk is the wrong word. At the very minimum, what I want to show on this channel is that there's not a lot of evidence in favor of these ideas. I could never possibly prove that these things are not true. That would be impossible in practice, really. And that's not a strength of the position either. That's something that people tend to get confused about. I cannot prove the non-existence of mind reading in the exact same way that I can't prove the non-existence of leprechauns. If you think that through, you'll realize that it is in fact impossible to prove the non-existence of leprechauns. Because if you looked everywhere in the universe for leprechauns, if that were even possible, which it isn't, I might add, but even if that were possible, when you were looking over here, someone could claim that the leprechaun was hiding over here, and when you were looking over here, someone could claim the leprechaun was hiding over there. And even if you searched all places in the universe simultaneously, again, an impossibility. Someone could then just cheaply point out, but this is a metaphysical leprechaun, this is an invisible leprechaun, and so then you'd be up shit creek without a paddle once again. I guess the point is that it's possible for someone to protect a metaphysical belief that they hold from scrutiny by adding these kinds of qualifications. This is something that was pointed out in what has become known as the parable of the gardener. This was popularized by Anthony Flew, but I believe it was originally created by John Wisdom, but I'll double check that, and if I'm incorrect, I'll put the correct information on the screen. In any case, the parable of the gardener is this brief story of two individuals that happen across a clearing in the woods, a clearing that appears to be remarkably well maintained. One of the two gentlemen believes that there's a gardener who must be maintaining this clearing, and the other one does not. So the pair set out to prove whether or not there is indeed a gardener. So they set up a whole series of systems to flush out the gardener. They put tripwires in place. They get sniffer dogs and the like. Okay. After each and every trap fails to successfully identify a gardener, the believer out of the pair of gentlemen adds a qualification. So when the sniffer dogs fail to sniff out a gardener, the believer says, it must be an odorless gardener. When the tripwires fail to reveal any physical presence, it must be a non-physical gardener, and on we go on our merry way. This led Anthony Flew to conclude, and I quote, that religious claims die the death of 1,000 qualifications, which is something that I'm very much on board with. And again, the same thing happens here with mind reading. The same thing happens with psychic phenomena and predicting the future. So when the psychic predicts the future and gets it wrong, or they'd never admit that, of course. They just say, it hasn't come true yet. And again, that's a qualification. That means that the psychic can never actually technically be incorrect. If the only two options you're going to entertain are, it's true, or it just hasn't come true yet, then there is no, you were incorrect option. And that's a problem for your position. If your position, and I challenge you right now, dear listener, if you are watching this video right now and you believe something that you are convinced is true and you can't think of a way that it couldn't be true, if you are of the position that there's absolutely nothing that could falsify this position, then it might be the case that you're believing something irrationally. You see, The test of a proposition's validity is whether or not it can be falsified. In other words, whether or not it can be tested. If you have constructed a belief for yourself that is impervious to testing, what you've done is construct an irrational, unprovable claim. And for that reason, you shouldn't be believing it to begin with. But I'll leave you to figure out your own beliefs. Onwards with the mind-reading discussion. So speaking of mind-reading then, I find myself in a very interesting position here as both a magician and a philosopher. You see, some people see these two fields as being in contradiction to one another, or in one way or another butting heads, because people view magicians as those who may want to trick and fool people, whereas philosophers are interested in pursuing the truth. And so people see those as oppositional in some way. I don't actually see it that way. I see the activities of a magician and the activities of a philosopher being intimately connected. You see, magicians are, for lack of a better description, experts in deception. As a magician, I have learned how to, quote, fool people over the last 15, 20 years of my magic career. And I've gotten pretty damn good at it. And I've got some clips coming up in this particular episode of the podcast, which are going to demonstrate that fact. But they're also going to demonstrate something else, which is the meat and potatoes of this video. But just allow me to explain for a moment how I view this connection between magic and philosophy, or the activities of a magician and a philosopher. You see, magicians, as I said, they're experts in deception, but that means that they're also experts in figuring out how people are deceived. When I watch a film and special effects accomplish an amazing outcome, I find myself being riveted by how it's done. As a child, and this will make perfect sense to those of you who know me from watching these videos all this time, as a child, I spent more time watching the special edition disc, the extra disc of the various films and movies that I watched. I watched how it's made more often than the movie itself. So one of my favorite films of all time is Terminator 2. I have watched the additional disc. I still have my 2-disc collector's edition at home. That DVD I almost burnt out from watching so many times. But I watched the additional disc more than the actual film, because what I was fascinated about is how did they make the T-1000's head explode open when Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800 shoots him in the face? How did they make a helicopter chase a Jeep down a freeway, right? Those kinds of questions. And I was always riveted by the answers. So as a child, and you might say shocking as a child, when I say child, I don't mean I was 5 or something. I was definitely, however, watching Terminator 2 by the age of 10. But you know what? By today's standards, I think it's a pretty harmless film. And as far as I'm concerned, it enriched my childhood. In any case, it shouldn't surprise anyone that that same kid who spent all of his time watching the special features discs, learning how they accomplish these movie effects, it shouldn't surprise anyone that that same kid got involved in magic. Absolutely not. Again, magicians are experts in deception. Magicians always want to know how something is done. And so that makes them uniquely qualified, I would argue, in terms of exploring how people are in fact deceived. And that's exactly what I do on my philosophy channel. You see, guys, far from this assumption that magicians and philosophers are at odds with one another, I believe that the two positions complement each other quite well. Just think about it for a moment. A magician uses tricks to deceive a person's eye, for example. There might be a trapdoor in the hat where the rabbit is hidden, or an invisible wire that helps the magician appear as though he's floating, and so forth. How is that different, principally speaking, from an argument for example, God's existence that uses a linguistic trick, right? An example that comes to mind is the ontological argument. The ontological argument, in my view, is one of the weakest arguments for God's existence. The ontological argument says, and I quote, essentially, it basically goes like this: God is the greatest conceivable being. In other words, if you could think of a being greater than God, then that would be God instead, right? So God is the greatest conceivable being, and it would be greater to exist in reality as well as in the mind. And so therefore, if God really is the greatest conceivable being, he must exist in reality as well, right? Now, that's very convincing to people who already believe in God. It might even sound very convincing to some of you who don't, but the problem is there's actually a verbal trick. There's a linguistic trick, almost like a magician's trick at play in that argument. And it goes something like this. Existence is treated as a characteristic. That is the flaw in the argument. That is the trick that the speaker is not necessarily consciously hoping to fool you with, but they very well may have been fooled by it themselves, right? So the trick is, again, let me restate the argument. So God is the greatest conceivable being. Even if I grant that, fair enough. Then it says it will be greater to exist in reality as well as in the mind. In other words, a being that only existed in the mind wouldn't be as great as a being that existed in reality as well. That sounds intuitively true, but what's really being said there is that part of God's greatness is the fact that he exists. The problem is, existence is not part of the description of something. If you think it is, just listen to the following statement and you'll realize how silly it is. I'm going to describe a cow right now. So the cow is black, the cow is white, the cow makes a moo noise, the cow exists, the cow, you see the problem there, right? How odd is that when I jump from describing characteristics of the cow to stating that suddenly the cow exists? You see, guys, the existence of something is not part of the description of the thing. Existence is a lot like geography. If I tell you where the cow is, I've told you nothing about the cow. I could tell you that the cow is in the desert. I could tell you that the cow is in the Arctic. I could tell you that the cow is in my back fucking garden. It doesn't matter where I tell you the cow is. I haven't told you anything about the cow itself. And existence is the same. I could describe something right now, like a unicorn. The unicorn looks like a horse. It neighs like a horse, except for it's got a horn coming out of its head. By the way, it doesn't exist. And again, see there the way I've jumped from one sphere to another? Talking about the existence of the unicorn is not describing anything about the unicorn itself. Same is true with the cow, and the same is true with God. So the ontological argument treats existence, this is how it's worded in the philosophical literature, it treats existence as a predicate. A predicate is an adjective, essentially. It's something that gives us more information about the object. And existence is not a predicate. And that is the failure of the ontological argument. The ontological argument essentially tries to define God into existence. It says that part of God's nature is that he necessarily exists. Now, of course, the weakness of that position is that we could attribute that to any object. So I'm going to invent a God right now, and it is the God of, let's go with the cow example, the holy cow, the holy sacred cow, right? Did you know that part of the description of the holy sacred cow is that the holy sacred cow necessarily exists? And again, you would be no more convinced of the existence of the holy sacred cow just because I defined it that way. It's a problem. But now, I'm going to digress here, back to the central question. How does this connect magicians to philosophers? Well, again, if you're not versed in the deception that can occur in philosophical argumentation, where existence can be treated as a predicate in, for example, the ontological argument, then you can be fooled. Well, the same is true in magic, guys. If you're not familiar with the techniques that a magician uses in order to, quote, read somebody's mind, then you're going to be fooled and you're going to believe that the magician is really and truly reading somebody's mind, or that the psychic is really and truly predicting the future. You see, as a philosopher, I've become intimately familiar with the nature of fallacious reasoning, right? Using arguments, for example, let me give you an example of a fallacious argument. If I said, of course I'm right, everybody agrees with me, that's a fallacy, right? A fallacy is a logical flaw in an argument that renders the conclusion invalid. In other words, if there's a fallacy in your argument, it has failed. It cannot possibly result in the conclusion you're hoping for it to demonstrate, because the fallacy renders that impossible. Well, the fallacy I just used there, of course I'm right, everybody agrees with me. That's the fallacy of consensus. It is the assumption that the truth has some connection with what the majority of people believe. And of course, that's not the case. I mean, the majority of people used to believe that the world was flat. They were wrong, right? Could the majority be correct in something? Of course they could. But they wouldn't be correct because they're in the majority. They would be correct because there is independent evidence that supports their point of view. And that's it. No more, no less. So, as a philosopher, I've become intimately familiar with the nature of fallacious reasoning, and it is these fallacies that can trick someone, they can fool someone if you're not familiar with them and if you can't identify them. You could be hoodwinked by a bad argument. Well, the same is true as a magician. As a magician, I've become intimately familiar with the various methods of deception. And because I have a familiarity with those methods, I'm no longer hoodwinked or fooled by the supposed psychic, or the supposed fortune teller, or the supposed mind reader. But some of you still might be thinking, but Dara, you do go out into the world and perform those effects. Does that not make you a hypocrite? Are you not encouraging people to believe this sort of stuff? And you're right, in one sense, I do go out into the world and perform this stuff. For those of you who aren't aware, or those of you who are more recent subscribers, there's a whole series of videos on my channel called Dara's Street Deceptions, where I go out onto the street and I perform magic for people. I read their minds, I predict the future, and so forth. However, there is one notable exception. At no point do I ever pretend, at no point do I ever try to convince people that what I'm doing is actually real, right? I present it almost psychologically, as though I'm reading the person. Now, that might not even be true either, you see, because magic is all about presentation. Speaking of magic and speaking of presentations and this connection between magic and philosophy, I want to show you a clip right now. In the following clip, you're going to see that I allegedly predict the future. Right? I want to show you this clip, and after you've seen it, we're going to discuss what happened and break it down. And I want to explain to you in more detail this connection between magic and philosophy and how the two really complement one another. But above all else, I want to demonstrate to you that the ability to read minds and that the ability to predict the future is in fact hogwash. It's not really real. I'm a magician. Definitionally speaking, a magician is a person who pretends to do magic. If you ever thought that a magician is presenting it as real, then you're not really talking about a magician anymore. You're talking about a wizard. Somebody presenting themselves as a wizard. I have never done that. So without further ado, let me show you this clip, and then we'll meet back here in a moment and discuss it. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, Vic and Stan, we've never met before, have we? Great. So it's important that we clarify for the people watching at home what we're about to do right now. We haven't set anything up beforehand, have we? I've never met you before. I haven't had a whisper in your ear beforehand, make sure and name this or do that. We haven't done anything like that, have we? Excellent. Guys, I've got a deck of cards here. I want to ask both of you, do any of you actually play cards?
No.
You don't? Are you familiar with how a deck of cards operates, though?
Yeah.
In terms of how many suits there are, picture cards, numbers, that kind of thing, right? So, Stan, was it?
Yeah.
Would you hold this deck of cards? Have you ever heard of the idea of influence?
Yeah.
Advertisers use it all the time. Have you ever just been sitting there and then all of a sudden it pops into your mind, gee, I'd love a Big Mac?
Yeah.
That happens every now and then, right? One of the reasons that happens is because McDonald's is actually very effective at influencing people and how they think. That branding with the golden arches and the yellow and so on, when you see that color yellow, even if it's not in a McDonald's advertisement, you might actually think of a Happy Meal, right? They get you when you're young. What I'm going to try and do now with you, Stan, is influence you, but I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to have to be pretty good if this is going to work. Everything I've said thus far has been chosen very carefully. I'm trying to implant, and I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I'm just going to say it right off the bat. I'm trying to implant a playing card in your mind.
Yeah.
Does it feel like I've done anything to your thoughts? Do you feel normal? Does everything feel right? Awesome. That's exactly how you should feel. Right now, I want you to name a playing card. The first one that pops into your head. Go. Say it.
Oh, say it. Two of diamonds.
The two of diamonds.
Yeah.
Did that feel like a free choice?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 5 seconds to change your mind. You don't have to, and let me be honest, most people don't. The only question is whether or not you're going to be in the minority who changes their mind. You've got 5 seconds to change your mind from the two of diamonds to something else. It's completely up to you. You don't have to. No pressure. Or maybe I'm trying to influence you right now. What do you think?
I don't know.
Here we go. 5, 4,
Ace of spades.
3, 2, 1. Yeah.
All right.
You want to stay on the ace of spades?
Yeah.
It almost felt like you panicked and said it.
Yeah.
You've got one last choice to make right now, Stan. Are you happy to stick with the ace of spades, or are you going to change it? This is your final choice. Go. You're going to stick or change? You're going to stick with the ace of spades?
Yeah.
Vic, is there any way I could have known that Stan was going to name the ace of spades? He even changed his mind a couple of times. You're not going to believe this. When I woke up this morning, I opened this deck of cards and I took out one playing card and I flipped it over and I put it back in.
Yeah.
And I knew there was a reason I did that this morning. Call it intuition, I don't know.
No.
Can you confirm for me, Stan, you were holding that deck of cards?
Yeah.
You've been holding it the entire time. I'm going to handle them at fingertips, Stan. You're going to make sure I don't do anything funny. I'm going to handle them at fingertips. I'm going to open the cards. I'm going to take them out. You can take the box, make sure there's nothing else inside. Okay? If we spread through this deck of cards, I know it's right near the middle. Right in the center there, Stan. There's one card.
No, what is that?
Oh my days.
What is that?
Oh no.
No, that's not right. You're a mad guy. What?
Oh my days. Kind of speechless, to be honest. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
It's like we've never met you before or anything. You just saw us and you asked if we could be in a YouTube video, and you guessed it right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's the first time as well.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say.
You're some weird guy.
Oh man, I must admit, I really love that trick. It's an amazing effect. And I must admit as well, I really enjoyed the company of those two guys. They were great sports and very, very generous with their time. And so, guys, if you ever do watch the video, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for partaking. And yeah, now you are in infamy. You will be remembered forever in this YouTube video, should it ever go viral. In any case, as you can see in that performance, guys, and I'm assuming that the vast majority of my audience are not magicians, and so you're not familiar with the various methods of deception. If indeed you're not a magician, you no doubt were very impressed by that effect. I don't want to assume too much, but at the very least, you'll no doubt have no clue how it was done. I mean, let's reflect on what happened for a moment. The spectator holds the deck of cards the entire time, and he thought of a card, I believe it was the 2 of diamonds first, and then he changed his mind to the ace of spades. And yet that was the card that was flipped over. Now, I can tell you right off the bat that there is no sleight of hand involved in the effect. Absolutely no sleight of hand involved whatsoever. This effect is essentially self-working. Now, I find myself in a very difficult position here because I cannot reveal how the effect was done because it is not my intellectual property. It is not my trick to give away. But it is a trick. I didn't really predict the future. Sorry to burst some of your bubbles. No, of course, none of you really believe that I predicted the future, but the effect, the illusion is a very strong one, isn't it? It's a very, very powerful illusion, right? And the reason it's a powerful illusion and the reason it probably fooled you is because, again, you're not familiar with the methods of deception that a magician uses. But please, if we're going to use this example for one thing, let's use it for this. If I, an avid skeptic and non-believer in supernatural phenomena, can perform what some people might very well call a miracle, and then still tell you that it was achieved using nothing other than trickery, then you absolutely should not believe any other example of predicting the future. Because I'll tell you this, when other so-called psychics predict the future, it's nowhere near as specific as the prediction you just saw. Show me the psychic who predicted something with such specificity. What we get instead from the psychic community are vague, very ethereal predictions. You're going to achieve success. But I mean, success could be anything from, I don't know, I got a new job to I won a tenner on a scratch card. I mean, I don't know, success is one of these kind of loose terms that could apply to a whole host of things. And you see, that's the problem. People can take these equivocal terms and apply them to a whole host of scenarios. Now, maybe the scratch card example doesn't work for you, but again, success could mean you just got an A in an exam. It could mean that you just got a new job. It could mean that you just had a video go viral on YouTube. It could mean any one of a dozen things, if not 100 things, if not 1,000 things. So when a psychic says you're going to achieve success, right? It is just so nefarious. It's just so just vague that it could be applied to almost anything. You see, guys, that's the thing. For a prediction of the future to be taken seriously, it must be specific. And if it's not specific and answerable by one event, well, then it's vague and essentially irrelevant. The effect that you just saw was me making a specific prediction about a specific outcome. The person names a playing card, and that is the specific card that is flipped the opposite direction in the deck. That is a very, very specific prediction. You will not see specific predictions like that coming from the so-called psychic and mind-reading community. And if you do ever encounter a specific prediction, there's one final thing I want to address, because some of you no doubt are going to say, oh, but Magic Skeptic, what about this example from here? This seems remarkably specific. There's also this thing of luck, where somebody can just get lucky, where somebody can just guess something and be correct. It happens all the time. It happens to me when I perform magic. I won't go into this in too much depth because I discussed it in a previous podcast, but suffice to say, I used to approach tables when I performed magic at weddings and things like that, holding a singular playing card. Very often it was the Queen of Hearts, and I would gesture to a lady and ask her to name a playing card that she feels says something about herself. 9 times out of 10, the lady named the Queen of Hearts, and then I would turn over the card and it would blow their minds. Of course, when they remembered it later, which is another thing that benefits these scam artists who are trying to convey the idea that they have real supernatural powers, this kind of memory or flawed memory. You see, our memories aren't perfect. We reconstruct events. And that lady who I turned over the Queen of Hearts for later on retells the story as, he told me just to name any card. And then that was the card he was holding. And then that seems like a miracle. And it's not that this person is lying. They're honestly relaying the events as their mind remembers them. They forget the extra detail, which was that I said to name a card that you feel says something about yourself. So all of these things come together to create a powerful sense of the existence of the supernatural, but it's hogwash. It's nonsense. And again, I can achieve an incredibly powerful prediction like the one you just saw, and yet I'm telling you that it's nonsense. It's not really real. Now, again, I can't tell you how exactly the effect is achieved. This is where there is, in fact, a tension between magic and philosophy, which I'm happy to acknowledge, because the philosopher in me wants to totally debunk that which I just did. I want to show you exactly how it's done so that you don't get hoodwinked by that method in the future. But then there's also this problem that I have as a magician, where I've essentially taken an oath not to reveal how certain effects are done, or not to reveal how any effect is done to one extent or another. Certainly not those that are not my own intellectual property. I did not invent that magic trick, so it is not my intellectual property, and so it is not my secret to reveal. And so it would be immoral for me to do so. But let me just, to put a pin in this and to wrap a neat bow around it and finish it here, let me just stress one final time. What you just saw was absolutely not a real example of psychic phenomena. What you saw is a magician doing what he does best: deception. So I want to move on now and show you one final example of so-called supernatural phenomena and my performance of it, or at least a performance that creates the illusion of it. And this example is more closely related with mind reading. So the first example we looked at was predicting the future. This example is about mind reading. Now, mind reading is another area where people seem to be just hopelessly hoodwinked. And again, it's another area where I see an intimate connection between magic and philosophy. Again, the reason the public gets hoodwinked by mind reading techniques is because they're not familiar with those techniques. Right? And as a philosopher, I see it as my duty to kind of unravel these techniques. And again, I can't explain exactly how these effects work because they're not mine to give away. But what I can do is give you some insight in terms of how they work, and certainly give you some sense that these, phenomena are not real, that they're not actual metaphysical or supernatural occurrences. And so, mind reading, guys, there's an immense amount of ways that the illusion of mind reading can be pulled off, some of which you may have heard of. One of the most popular ones is the cold reading technique. Cold reading is the ability to say things that are vague and yet sound incredibly specific, right? They're often known as Barnum statements that can apply to everyone but sound very specific. So an example might be something like, if I was giving you a reading, I might say, "It's very interesting looking at you right now. I'm getting a sense that when you're at a party, you feel kind of self-conscious. You find yourself being overwhelmed with thoughts about what other people are thinking. You find yourself second-guessing things that you've said, wondering whether or not you've offended anybody, or that little twitch in somebody's eye and whether or not they reacted badly. And sometimes you think about this so much that it can put you in a negative space. And yet other times at that exact same party, you find yourself being the life and soul of the event. You're laughing and joking and getting along with people and just having a great time. And it's in those moments that you feel more fulfilled. It's in those moments that you feel more alive. And you would much rather be there rather than that other psychological space that I described earlier. Now, if you reflect on what I just said there, really reflect on what I just said, it does sound very specific, doesn't it? I said a lot of stuff there. It seemed like I was digging deep into your psychological makeup and discussing the intricacies of your mind and how it works. But all I really said there was that you have an introverted side and an extroverted side. That's all I said. Because the truth is, everybody fits what I just said. Everybody in the world has those moments where they reflect and they wonder if they should have said what they said, where they feel a little bit more insecure and whether or not they fit in. And then everybody has those other moments where they get along better with people and where they're laughing and joking and forgetting about their problems. But you see, if I word it this way, it's not at all mysterious. It's not at all fooling. But if I word it the other way, in the context of looking deeply into your eyes and maybe analysing your palm and having a deep conversation, and I'm a psychic and I'm going to tell you, all of a sudden, all those words take on a much more profound meaning. So yeah, there are lots of ways to do mind reading. Cold reading is just one technique. There are many other techniques that I can't exactly explain, albeit I have gone into some of them on my channel. If you're interested, there is a video I've made on my Magic School series of videos. It's called How to Read Minds. On the note of predicting the future, I made a video about that as well. It's called How to Predict the Future. If you want to see 2 additional techniques in terms of how a person can read someone's mind and how somebody can predict the future, there's 2 wonderful techniques that are described in those videos. If you're interested, you can feel free to check those out. But suffice to say, there are a plethora of methods that a magician can use in order to fool someone. And I'm going to show you a clip now where I do what looks to be a very direct example of mind reading. And again, let me preface showing you the video with this message. What you're about to see is not real. What you're about to see, as real as it seems, is achieved using other methods, using completely naturalistic and normal techniques that are available to any human being. The one notable difference, I suspect, between you and I is that you're not a magician, and so you haven't learned these techniques. And so this will, in all likelihood, probably be very convincing and very fooling. But remember, it's bullshit. It's not real, but I've said enough. Take a look, and we'll talk about it in a moment. I hope you enjoy it. Now, Vic, I'm going to get you to think of a word, something that's important to you, right? So just imagine that word in your mind and imagine all of the letters. Imagine exactly what each letter looks like. Imagine as if you'd drawn it yourself. Imagine how that would feel to actually draw that in your mind right now. I'm going to ask you a question, Vic. Is it okay? Could you put out your hand like this? Now, you don't have to say yes to this. Is it okay if I touch your hand? Because I know with social distancing, some people are a little bit uncomfortable. Are you comfortable with that? Awesome. So, Vic, I'm just going to touch your hand like this. And I want you to imagine right now that you're drawing that word. You're writing it out. Imagine it and imagine sending it straight to me. Are you sending that word now?
Yeah.
Imagine that first letter. Imagine it going right through my arm all the way up and into my head, from your brain through this connection that we're just forming right now into my mind. Straight away, I'm getting a sense of a letter. No, I'm not actually sure if that's the first or the last. I see an S in there somewhere. Is that right?
Yeah.
I asked you to think of any word. Did you think of something that was meaningful to you? Because I'm getting a sense right now that whatever it is that's in your mind right now, it matters to you. Is that right?
Inspiration.
It's interesting that you've used that word. You said inspiration. Is there an I in here as well?
Yeah.
An inspiration. Imagine that first letter. I think I've got it. Were you thinking of... You were thinking of Messi.
No.
No way. How? What? He's a wizard. That's all I have to say. He's a wizard. It's a weird feeling. Never been felt.
I'm happy I was your first, Vic. Thanks a lot, Vic. I appreciate it. So, what did you think? Fooled? Did I really read his mind? Or was it all just achieved naturally using standard psychological techniques and magicians' deceptions and methods? What do you think? I trust and I hope that you believe me because, and I want to address this in closing, you would not believe the amount of people I encounter who tell me, right? You will not believe this. So I tell them, no, magic isn't real. What you just saw is achieved using methods that any human being can accomplish. There's no supernatural element. There's no metaphysical element. These are just deception techniques that magicians learn and that are available to anyone in any magic book. And then these people, I won't name names, but they say to me, no, you're lying. You really did read his mind, or you really did predict the future, but you're just trying to cover up the fact that you have that skill. You're trying to keep it to yourself. And I'm just like, oh my God. This is how deep the irrationality goes, guys. And again, this is why I see my role as a magician and a philosopher as being united. They're not divided. As a magician, I can entertain people with magic whilst also making them aware of the fact that these techniques are not supernatural. They're not metaphysical. They are completely normal. They are achieved using the 5 known senses to create the illusion of a 6th. And so as a philosopher, I see my role as debunking bad arguments, identifying fallacies, and trying to get closer to the truth. And yet I see my role as a magician in the exact same way. I am not lying to you. I do not have any supernatural abilities. I do not have any metaphysical powers. The occult isn't real, guys. Mind reading isn't real. The future can't really be predicted. And if it could, the time to believe it would be as and when evidence is provided. But please remember that the fact that somebody did allegedly predict the future is not the evidence you're looking for. No more than the fact that I predicted the card that the person was going to think of is evidence of somebody successfully predicting the future. And the same is true for mind reading, guys. The fact that I knew what somebody else was thinking is not evidence for mind reading, and nor is it evidence if anybody else knows what somebody else is thinking. That is just simply an observation. Now we've got something worth exploring. And let me tell you, as a magician who has done the necessary exploring, the manner in which I achieved that effect was purely naturalistic. It did not involve anything supernatural. It did not involve anything metaphysical. And I can assure you that when other people do the same, it does not involve anything supernatural either. This effect can be achieved, again, using the 5 known senses to create the illusion of a 6th. It's supposed to fool you, guys. It's designed to fool. It's deception. That's it. And so, remember this. If you were in fact fooled by the prediction of the future or the mind-reading effects that I performed in this video, don't feel bad. Because those effects are designed to fool you. They are created from the ground up in order to hoodwink members of the public. A magic trick is only successful if it fools people. The problem is, of course, that some magicians don't stop there. They're not just content with fooling people. They're not just content with entertaining people. They want to take it a step further and have the public actually believe that they are themselves a god or some kind of an individual with supernatural abilities. This is why I have such a profound problem with someone like a Uri Geller, who actually tried to convince the public that he really had telekinetic powers and could bend spoons with the power of his mind, while the magicians of the world watched on and laughed because they were familiar with the techniques he was using. It is immoral to lie to the public in order to present yourself as some kind of a supernatural, superhuman, right? That's not okay. Now, before you say, is it not bad for you as well, Magic Dara, to lie to the public and do magic? Well, I wouldn't agree, no, because the deception that I engage in as a magician, and I've made a whole video about this called Is Magic Dishonest, which I would encourage you to check out, but just to give you the bullet point, the deception I engage in as a magician is paradoxically truthful. right? I entertain people with deception so that they might experience something real, so that they might have a moment where they forget the problems in their life and enjoy themselves for a moment. I do not present my magic as though it is real, as though I am a person with real supernatural powers. I present my magic as a form of entertainment for the enjoyment of others, to bring a smile to people's faces. Remember this, as Sam Harris said on stage with Jordan Peterson a number of years back at a live event in Dublin, paradoxically, fake magic is real and real magic is fake. You see, I do fake magic, but it's real in the sense that it is achieved with real methods. It is achieved with real sleight of hand. It's the real magic that is fake. It is the magic that Uri Geller does that is fake. It is the mind readers who tell you that they're really reading your mind. Those people are the fakes. It is the fortune tellers who tell you that they can really predict the future. Those people are the fakes, because they're using the same techniques I'm using. It's just that they're telling you that it's real, and it isn't, guys. And so to wrap all this together, and in closing, is there a connection between magic and philosophy? Absolutely yes. Just as a magician explores the methods of deception that are possible in order to entertain people, philosophers explore the deception at play in arguments in order to enlighten people. And I think that there's a very powerful connection there. So the next time you see a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, just remember, there might very well be a trap door in that hat. But similarly, the next time somebody presents an argument to you for the supernatural, for mind reading, or for predicting the future, just remember that there's a proverbial trap door in that argument someplace as well. Because the truth is, in my view, it's not possible to argue in favor of any of these phenomena without committing one fallacy or another. And I'll leave it to you to figure out what the fallacy is in each case. Guys, thank you very much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. And if you enjoyed it, the one surefire way you can help me is to drop a like on the video. I don't expect any payment. I don't expect anything like that. I just want you to drop a like on the video so that you can tell the YouTube algorithm to send this video out to other people and so that the channel can grow. That would be really, really very much appreciated. In addition to that, if you have been enjoying the channel more generally, do consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you do, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things Magic Dara, Magic Skeptic, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. So guys, thank you again for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.